Hi, Paul.
Hey, Dario, how's it going, man?
I'm fine. Today I'm on vacation, but I'm still trying to join the meeting anyways. 6.5 past here, so
Oh, man.
yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
What a way to spend your vacation.
Yeah, but anyways, at the end of the day for me, so it's somehow it's not a real vacation, sure, but at least today I was not at the office, let's say.
Yeah.
Hi, Irfan.
Hi, Paul. Hi, Dario.
Hey, Irfan, how you doing, man?
Great. How are you?
Good.
So, Quinton pinged me before the meeting, stating that he wouldn't be joining today's meeting.
Okay.
I believe you guys were supposed to have a sync. Is there any update after that, or I mean, we can chat up after this meeting or beyond this meeting also.
Yeah. I synced up with Quentin offline.
Okay.
Let's see here. Oh, I'm not editing this document.
So he did send me a short gist also with what he wants to do. I mean, his intention is, or his, I would say, wishes. So.
Is that on like the subject of Federation?
Yes. Moving ahead with Federation in some way.
Okay.
So we have had these discussions, and I think we have sort of almost touched upon all the aspects, and I think probably we are 90% complete with the spec of the API also. I mean, discussing the aspects which should be considered for the spec of the API.
Yeah.
Right? So last
at
meeting
least for the simple case.
Yes,
like,
yes. And I believe like Maru was also on the same note that I think for complicated cases and the actual implementation, we can actually be updating the spec or the document relevant to the spec while or after implementation, because we might find different challenges during implementation, which cannot really be fleshed out in beginning itself.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, so last meeting, Quinton did mention that we probably either need to reduce the frequency of this brainstorming that we have been doing. Second, we need to move to a more official place for whatever work we are doing in terms of the implementation of the spec and the controllers. So that's the second point, and third point is, what did he tell me? He told me to figure out some way where we can maybe either come up at some common ground in terms of the implementation. For example, Maru has taken 3 resources and implemented one of the simple workflows as described in Quinton's talk. Like there are different possible workflows which can be achieved in Federation or using the Federation API. So Maru has implemented one of the simple workflows. So if we compare with Federation V1 is something like an automated system. Like you create some resources, for example, a deployment or a replica set. And one of the inherent features is that it will take care of failing clusters and move replicas around, and it will understand if there is load or the pods are unscheduled, that kind of stuff, and it will take care of such cases, and it will be able to rebalance across the clusters and all that. So his thought process, or he envisions that use case, and I actually have concrete use cases from the marketing team of Huawei, and that's what they are looking at. So let me complete just maybe
sure.
a couple of more sentences. So that's what we are actually looking at building. So one exercise which we need to arrive at, which is like ASAP, is API spec is not that important. It is. I understand that it is important in terms of the correct spec would mean the correct implementation of controllers and ease of usage to the users, and all the relevant aspects which are about the API. But one of the more important points to us is arriving or reaching at the similar level of functionality what Federation V1 actually exists as of today, or existed maybe 6 months, 8 months ago, using the new API spec.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
So Federation V1 has some X set of functionality, right? It has some controllers, and it has some feature set with the controllers. For example, I gave that, for example, deployment controller or replica set controller has that inherent feature that if a deployment is created in Federation, it will ensure that it will place the replicas at the correct cluster where it needs. This is without users' intervention of saying, okay, I want to, of course, user can override this behavior, but if there is no user intent specified that the replica set should go into this cluster and some replicas should not go into the other cluster, then it's an automated system. So
I think I would just quibble with one point on that, because I mean I think we're on the same page with respect to the intent of Federation V1.
Mm-hmm.
But if that replica set had any dependency on any other resources, your application will just break, because there's no way to declare that, oh yeah, by the way, this replica set depends on this secret. And so if you move this to this cluster, you actually have to make sure that the secret has compatible like distribution rules. And the scheduling basically just doesn't take secrets into account, or like it's resource based. So I would just, to me, that's a huge hole in the utility of Federation V1.
I think we should back up a little bit. There's a lot to unpack here. So let's take it one thing at a time. The first item that you mentioned, Irfan, I think was reducing the frequency of the Federation working group meetings.
Correct.
We've had some time to talk about that internally at Red Hat. I think that we would support that. Maru, I seem to recall we talked about maybe once every 2 weeks. Is that about right?
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. I mean, the goal is less about discussion and more about show and tell, giving us an opportunity to make sure we're providing regular updates and sharing knowledge on a regular basis. And, cut it down to half an hour. It doesn't have to be like laborious or anything, but move away from collaborating with the intent of converging and just more give us an opportunity to find common ground in the future.
Do you think once every 2 weeks would be sufficient for Huawei folks, Irfan?
I think it should be okay. And I think we also know who are the engineers involved in this effort. So if there is something which we basically need to communicate, we can reach out to individual engineers also. I mean, what I mean to say is I don't see much which we maybe need to discuss with the wider working group as such. I thought there were a lot of people who actually joined just to be able to understand what's going on. And I think at that space, we have moved to next level, I guess, now, right?
I think it might be useful to be presenting on a regular basis like progress, so that people who are interested can be kept apprised, even if they're not involved in day-to-day development.
In that case, I'm. I mean, what do you say about once a week then?
Oh, I'm happy with toy. Like, I don't necessarily think we have to do it more frequently because I mean, there has to be development scale up. You know, we actually have to have stuff implemented that we can show. So I would say cut it back to every 2 weeks, even cut it back to half an hour. If we need more time, we can always adjust that. But I think just scaling it back so we have less intrusion on, you know, the time that would otherwise be spent in development. And as things become more coherent, and if we gain more interested parties, then we can always, you know, have more time to present things to people.
So
Yeah.
It sounds like maybe once a week on Wednesday.
Once a week on Wednesday. Yeah, that's okay for me. I think it's okay for Shashi also. Shashi, is that okay for you? I thought he was.
Yeah.
Does that work for everybody else on the call? Actually, Dario, I think you said Wednesday is like a really tough day for you.
Yeah, it is, but no problem. Take Wednesday. I will try to. I will look at when I be able to join. I will join. Otherwise,
Okay.
I will look at the recording, and eventually I will get in touch in other ways. I have other way to contact you.
Okay.
Yeah. Is there anybody from Google joined today? I don't know. I mean,
I don't
maybe-
think we have anybody from Google on today. I noticed, I think it's Leah. Is it Leah?
Yeah, Leah from Samsung. How's it going?
It's good. I've seen you join a couple times before. Does Wednesday at this time slot, like, is that okay for you?
Yeah, the timing's a little bit hard, definitely for twice a week, but I think I can do it on a more regular basis once a week. So that's helpful for sure.
Okay. It sounds like we have kind of a informal consensus for now to go to 1 day a week Wednesday.
Yeah, that should be okay.
So I think the next thing was moving work to a more official spot.
Yes.
So about that, we after the Monday meeting, we've been discussing on the Red Hat side what we think is the best thing to do with the Fnord project, and we're all, I think, on the same page internally at Red Hat. The folks that like you see in this meeting from Red Hat, that we think it's very valuable to find the right low-level API constructions for higher-level things to target, and we would like to move the Fnord repo under the Kubernetes SIGs org. Let's see. I will drop a link to that in the chat. I don't necessarily think that we need to hash that out now, but I will just say, like, I think that if other folks in SIG multi-cluster are going to prototype and work on other approaches to this problem, I think that's totally fine. I see no reason why they can't coexist in Kubernetes SIGs. And we're very interested in continuing to add support for new core Kubernetes types to Fnord, and then also eventually add support for CRD types. We think that's very important to have, like, primitives that other folks can target. So I will probably send out an email to SIG multi-cluster today and propose that we move that to Kubernetes SIGs. I wonder if any folks have, like, input or thoughts on that.
I don't have any problem with that moving over there. We probably need to converge on the name of the repo. Do you intend to keep it as Fnord or something else?
We were thinking just keep it as Fnord.
My suggestion would be something more formal.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely open to suggestions. I personally really like Fnord. I think it's a silly name. I love silly names for things, but I'd listen to any suggestions folks had.
I think in the near term, it's unclear as to like what replaces Federation. So while that remains unclear, I don't really see a need to formalize the name.
So what do you say about Federation V2 in that sense? Federation V2 seems like what we are working on.
Who's working on? It appears that we're diverging. So, like I said, to me, that's not clear. So while that remains in flux, I don't really want to block on something that doesn't really affect development. It's just kind of like it's a messaging thing. So
yeah, I would say that that in the near term, I think it's kind of unclear exactly what shape official Federation V2 would take. I'm most interested in, since we now have this Kubernetes SIGs org, like we're most interested in Red Hat and getting it out of like Maru's personal GitHub account and into a place that indicates that it's something that the SIG works on. I think if we wanted to rename it later, we totally could, but that's something that we don't have to get the name perfect right now. And I personally suck at naming things, so I try to spend as little time on it as possible.
Okay. Yeah. So, what exactly, Maru, Paul, is your intention or plan of doing further in F0?
I mean, we're going to keep building on the primitives that we've identified as being core to a solution to propagate configuration, coordinate configuration for multiple clusters. In the absence of consensus on what those are, I think we don't really want to stop development or adopt it, something that we don't feel is tested or proven. So
yeah, so I think Irfan, I think the next the near term for Fnord is that we're going to continue adding support for new types. For example, Lindsay added support for deployments to Fnord last week. Dario, I think you're working on adding job support, right?
Right. I'm just to understand better what's the flow. I think I know pretty well the jobs in Kubernetes, so it's pretty logical for me to try to do that.
Yeah, I seem to recall you have some passing familiarity, let's say, with jobs.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Irfan, I think we're going to continue adding support for additional controllers like jobs, daemon sets, etc. And one thing that we also think is really key to figure out is how we can add support for new types with either writing like a bare minimum of code or no code at all. So for example, if you have a CRD that is internal to your organization, no one else knows about, I think I think there's a very strong use case there for making it so that you can federate an arbitrary CRD, for example. That's the kind of thing that we're interested in the near term. Does that make sense?
It does. And see, honestly speaking, I don't really see that, personally speaking, I wouldn't really want to diverge, as Maru just mentioned that we are diverging. And I have seen what work Maru and Ivan has put in F0. I consider it quite useful. especially the testing part that you guys have updated. You have simplified the whole process really nicely. So what I'm still looking forward to somehow being able to do whatever we are doing at the same location at least. See, I have been trying to propagate the same thing that because we do get to review each other's work, and then that comes out to be better. That's what I understand. And if we put maybe two repos doing similar kind of work or similar stuff into different repos, and both of them in Kubernetes SIG, or which is for, we say that the work done by Federation SIG, then it's confusion for developers and users both. So I don't know, maybe outside this meeting, Maru, maybe we can have a chat for some time.
Sure,
and
yeah.
see how we can work together. So let me say it in this way. So I have the responsibility of giving some working solution, not a production ready solution, but some working solution within 3 months for Federation to my internal teams. And for them, it is something like you do it at any location. It really doesn't matter. It can be open source location. I mean, it ideally has to be an open source location, which if the community is interested in, or if it is in collaboration with community, it's great. But they basically want something done or working in, say, 3 months timeline or time frame. So if we can achieve arrive at that, I believe if we work together, I mean, it will be faster for us. In Huawei's perspective or whatever, rather than diverging and doing stuff separately.
Yeah, I totally get that, and honestly, I think it's best for us all to collaborate, and I would not want us to reinvent the wheel. I quite honestly think that we're extremely close, maybe modulo some vocabulary choices on how things should work. So I would love to have folks collaborate together in Finord personally, and if we decide at some point that we're on the same page enough that there's some common ground that we can call Federation V2, even better.
Yeah, so yeah, so how about this? Let's call whatever we are going to put in this Kubernetes SIG as Federation V2, and let's put whatever is there in Finord, Maru's work and Ivan's work as the base over there. And I think in the previous meeting or sometime earlier, Maru and I were talking we can have different controllers also under different hierarchy in the same repo, even if you can have two different deployment controllers doing different things, right? So one might be a simple controller, which is a static reconcile kind of a stuff. Another one might be a controller which does some dynamic adjustments and all that, which is a higher level abstraction kind of a thing. So doing this kind of stuff seems okay, or?
I think that's fine. I think the only part that maybe is a little bit of a concern in my mind is how we sort of, if we're going to have, if we're going to be working in the same repo and kind of trying to converge on a solution, I do worry a little bit about having divergent API, but at the same time, hopefully that could just be something we hash out, as part of development. I mean,
yeah.
None of the API constructs that we have are kind of
need not conflict with each other, right?
Well, hopefully not. Some of the discussions that we've had in these working group meetings have been a little bit contentious. So I'm just kind of voicing I'm hoping we can sort of focus on the functional, because I think we're all kind of on the same page when it comes to understanding what federation is about and how you have to sort of work within the constraints of Kubernetes to achieve, what you want to do. And given that common understanding, I think we come up with the same API. It's more like if we're not considering the underpinnings that we're working to, then things can diverge. So I'm kind of hopeful that, that what you're proposing to work in the same repo will actually allow us to converge in a way that discussion didn't.
Yeah. So my own sense is that it seems likely to me that the additional, like the work to make something that has the same type of functional characteristics as Federation V1 seems like it would be at a higher layer of abstraction than what is currently in Fnord. So it seems likely to me that we would like start prototyping those higher level things and target like what's already in Fnord as outputs. Does that kind of jive for everybody?
I mean, as a starting point. Sorry,
yeah.
Sorry,
yeah, go ahead, Maru. You speak, then I'll
I mean, to me, this is kind of an implementation decision. I mean, there's been some question whether like a really advanced implementation would want to have this intermediate representation. But I think in the short term, having like a reliable propagation mechanism that feeds off these primitive types, that offers the opportunity to prototype like advanced scheduling behavior without having to worry about all the logistics of propagation.
Yeah.
If at some point that needs to, encompass and sort of take on the responsibility for propagation, that's an option. But kind of from a speed of development perspective, I think reuse is handy. I like it.
Yeah, and also one more thing that, I mean, doing it together comes as an advantage to my mind is I see there are a lot of developers and many of them are interested. Some people have reached out to me individually asking for specific stuff like stateful sets or HPA, for example. Recently, I'm not talking about older times and all. And they have reached out to me because those documents were written by me. So it seems that there is some interest in users, and it seems that there are developers also who might be interested in getting bootstrapped into some kind of development effort or getting stuff together. So if we put this all together, we can sort of devise a plan also with stuff assigned to people. And once that is done, then there is no necessary conflict of possible functionality also. So, and if there is any, then the developers can talk to each other and maybe resolve it out.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. So I was like in last meeting. Oh, okay. Yesterday's meeting, Quinton did talk about that SIG charter and some template which needs to be aligned to that SIG charter template and all that stuff. So he did pass on those details to me and did ask to initiate the repo and update the charter and do the relevant PRs. So, Paul, you mentioned that you would probably send out a mail today to multi-cluster group about requesting the movement of Fnord to multi-cluster, to Kubernetes SIG.
Yeah, yes, I'm going to try to do that today. I want to get a note in here around what we just, like the last couple of conversational beats that we discussed. And I am terrible at taking notes, so I seek input.
Oh, I saw that you were writing, then I stopped. Okay,
I seek input to what I'm writing. So I'm writing down the consensus that we have a broad enough overlap on the fundamentals, and that it's good to develop going forward in the same repo, and then also consensus that we will likely work through implementation challenges as they come up, right? And then shared perception, I think that there are developers interested / eager in the community, developers in the community interested / eager in participating in development, right?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. My action item here is call to send email to, well, am I sending an email to SIG multi-cluster, or do we have enough consensus now that we're gonna create a new repo in Kubernetes SIGs?
I
Do
think
we have a thread to decide the name, or should we just go ahead and create it?
I would strongly suggest that we name it something which probably will remain rather than thinking that we'll change it or whatever.
But I guess the question is, I mean, is this going to become Federation? And if so, like, how are we going to
See, Maru,
differentiate?
there is nobody else who is vouching in. For example, Google folks are not working on this. You are working on this, and we are working on this. So,
Right.
and whatever we put out over there, it's going to be the Federation as a project, right?
Yeah, no, I would be happy to have it be called Federation. I'm just worried about the potential for confusion if Kubernetes Federation continues to exist in its current location. I would maybe I would be happy to have Kubernetes SIG Federation, so long as Kubernetes Federation is moved to a location and maybe renamed to indicate its V1 or prototype status, so there's no room for confusion.
How about this? What if we called it Kubernetes SIGs / Federation -V2? And
That's what my suggestion was.
And the top of the README in this repo will explain, the origin story of Federation V2 and say that it's a work in progress, and disambiguate it from Kubernetes / Federation. And then we should add a note in Kubernetes / Federation that's like the other side of the same note that points people to Kubernetes SIG / Federation V2. How does that sound?
Yep, that sounds perfect to me.
Okay. So
in fact, actually, I created one repo named Federation V2 under my user, and I did some sort of same exercise for deployments API over there. And then I realized that we'll be doing so much of replicated work at both places if we do it separately. So it's just better to do it together. Whatever controllers we write, if we don't have consensus on controllers, we can probably name controllers something like deployments, advanced, or deployments, basic, something like that. That's what my suggestion is.
Okay. I'm just capturing all this in the notes. Okay. And then I think the action item is now that I will send an email to steering committee to have new repo created. Okay. I think that's all captured in the notes now.
Okay. That sounds great. Give me 2 minutes. I have an interruption here. I'll be back.
All right. So does anybody know any really good multi-cluster jokes?
No,
think
but
that-
I'll definitely work on that one.
I'm trying and failing to think of something funny that I can say about multi-cluster, but I don't think my brain is working fast enough right now.
I feel like I just always go to the exhibit Pimp My Ride, like, so you want a cluster for your cluster type scenario.
Well, so since we're referencing early 2000 pop culture, I did have some inkling of a joke around K-Fed.
Oh my God, yes. I have definitely had some like GIF ideas in my head for multi-cloud K-Fed, and then like different phases of Kevin, Federline? Is that where you're going?
That's where I was going. Kevin
But
Federline, it is.
Yes. We need to make some media on that subject, I think.
There we go. I dropped a link into the chat. Wow, he's a professional wrestler too.
So I'm going to propose that we rename KubeFed to KFed.
Yeah, that sounds okay to me.
Does this mean that we have to rename KubeNord?
Yeah, it'll become KFET.
Sounds like it.
Okay.
Let's
Do we have anything else on that we might want to talk today?
So I had an idea, like if we're all done with this stanza of the conversation, I had an idea about validation that I'm not sure is any good, and in the proud history of my sharing ideas that I'm not sure if they're any good, I'd like to share this one.
Please go ahead.
Okay, so just to refocus the conversation. So we talked in the last meeting, and we talked before about this. And my canonical example is like there's something in Service Catalog called Pod Preset, which is a resource that has like a subset of the pod stack. And right now, validations aren't exported from Kubernetes. So there's no like repo that we can vendor in that would be like Kubernetes/API validations or something. So we could take, we could maybe, like ideally, I think we'd be able to do like, I have a Kubernetes-1.10.0 dependency on Kubernetes/API validations, and then get the specific validations for that version.
I don't think we want to do that though.
You don't think so?
Well, I mean, it seems like a good idea, like at first, but there's two things that I think shift my attention away from trying to consume validation.
Okay.
One is that keeping it in sync is kind of a maintenance burden. Like, oh, I have to vendor this. Oh, well, I vendored version, 110. And now 111 and 112 is out. Well, which version am I going to use? Probably I just have to keep it, whatever latest release is. So that's probably a minor issue. But the secondary issue is I want to vendor an arbitrary type without code. Now, I know this is forward-looking, but I would suggest that it might be preferable to try to create a validation mechanism within the cluster, like to have a test namespace where you just create a resource and delete it, but it gives you an opportunity to run it through API machinery. Or better yet, we actually enable something within any given API server that allows you to create -dry run, which runs it through admission control, or maybe not admission control, but runs it through the validators and gives you this is good or this is bad.
Yeah,
that way it's completely extensible rather than, oh, I got to build in code.
So Maru and I previously did not discuss this, but that's basically where I was headed. Is like as a short-term hack, you could probably like build something that you could like post a new resource to and it would just give you a response that said it was valid or not. I think longer term, it would be extremely useful to be able to have a real live API server offer up like a validation endpoint that you could just post a resource to, and it would apply the validations for that and tell you whether it was valid or not. Is that kind of where your head was, Maru? I think that's what you just described.
Pretty much, with the caveat that was also raised, I believe, on Monday, that I mean, in pod presets, well, I can't speak to what problems you're facing in service catalog, but I mean, I create a template. The template, I mean, is currently how we're talking about it. The template's pretty complete, and we're not actually allowing override of very many fields. If we start allowing more validation, like validation of different fields, there's a possibility that the template, like we'd actually have to accept the template, run it through the validator, but then we'd have to accept, when we accept overrides, we have to run the output of combining those with the validator. And that even that doesn't guarantee us validation, because there could be quota issues. There could be, specific validation on a given cluster for whatever resource, for whatever reason. So we're trying to do more work up front, but we can never be totally sure that what we accept will be valid in a given cluster. And I want to lay that out just so that we make sure we take on the effort of documenting and communicating that to users. We'll do our best, but there's, best effort is all we can do.
Yeah, I think that there's no way to guarantee that we can equate an acceptance from a federation API standpoint, like with a guarantee that eventually every cluster that you put a resource into is going to accept it for, like, based on validations or quota or any other like type of initializer or emission controller that might be registered in that cluster, right? So it's probably something that we should design for, that like there has to be a really good way to surface errors in validation or other, like, cluster rejected thing. Here's the message to users in a way that is easily accessible.
Yeah,
But
sorry, go ahead.
yeah, but does this? I mean, there has been this discussion around this validation. I saw a couple of issues which are outstanding, and some work already done on them. Because, for example, Paul, you mentioned that cluster your service catalog also has this problem. Some other users probably also did put up similar problems. So one of the comments that I read over there is that if you put this, like whatever I understand you are talking about is a separate server or separate validator running in parallel with, say, Kubernetes cluster. If we talk in terms of Kubernetes cluster, the validation will happen separately, and then if it is valid according to this validator, the object will be submitted to the cluster. But there's no guarantee that it will work fine, right? So some people, I don't really remember the name, they mentioned that this is not an acceptable solution because it's deemed to break things, and users might then expect that this should work.
Who? Oh. This isn't in the context of federation, though. It's just in the context of a single cluster.
In the context of any entity which is trying to create something in a cluster, and they are either wrapping the actual K8s resource within some separate CRD or something like that, especially in the context of CRD.
That was a CRD like Open API issue.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
You remember it correctly. So wouldn't it be similar, right?
I think that it'll converge on the same problem, yeah.
The problem is that your validator is sort of duplicating the task that Kubernetes API server would be doing. and you cannot keep compatibility for all the versions of all the APIs at a given point of time, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the versioning support in CRDs is pretty weak at this point. So, I mean, to my mind, it still comes down to best effort. I mean, in the case of Kubernetes, you're accepting API requests, and to the best of your ability, or to the best of its ability, the API server will say, "Oh, yeah, that's fine." And then when it tries to run, like, the pod that you submitted, it could fail for any number of reasons. So it's like we're doing as much, we're trying as hard as possible to fail fast, but there's just an upper limit on how many errors you can detect. And Federation magnifies that because then you have multiple clusters involved with potentially different behavior. And the representation that you submit to Federation may not be like, it's not the final representation you'll see in the clusters necessarily. So I'm just saying we do our best. I really do think this is just something where we'll develop strategies that will hopefully make the problem like easier to deal with by the user. But really, it's mitigation strategies. We're not going to come up with some deterministic way to solve it in all cases. It's more, how do we make this pain acceptable?
Yeah. I mean, I do agree that maybe whatever Paul suggested or you suggested right now, that a validator separately where you can submit the object and you would outright know that this spec is correct or not, does make sense.
Within constraints, but yeah.
I mean, it's better than not validating at all.
Right, I agree.
Okay. So, Paul, are you going to propose this in context of similar solutions? Like Federation has this problem, Service Catalog has this problem, CRDs have this problem.
Yeah,
you were thinking of doing that, or you were just talking in context of Federation and Service Catalog?
Well, so Service Catalog is a slightly different problem because it's a subset. But I have created an issue for this where I seem to recall that I think it was Daniel Smith suggested the idea of, like, it might not have been on this issue, it might have been on another one, suggested the idea of having a dry run parameter that you could just add to a API create request that would turn it into requests just to do the validation. And I think that would kind of fit the bill. But I'm actually not sure if that's what we were talking about now. I was a little distracted on my end. Am I still on the same page, or did I lose the thread?
I think you're on the same page. I mean, we have the Kubernetes type. We want to validate it. I think that I don't know where OpenAPI fits into this, because that's been kind of the way CRDs have been proposed to be validated, and there's kind of maybe limits to how effective or deep that can go.
There are fairly low limits to what you can do with OpenAPI, and for that reason, you can also write like a validating webhook that you apply to a CRD type, so you can do more complex validations. Having spent more hours than I can count in Kubernetes validation code, I'm not sure that, well, I'm quite pessimistic about the ability to express validations for complex types like pods solely in OpenAPI. So it seems like a dry run would be very generically useful.
Yeah, and just checking that issue that Dario pointed us at, it looks like Quentin and Daniel had an exchange where Daniel suggests dry run, and he says, "Oh, it's going to be added soon." So awesome.
Sorry, it will be added soon? Can you put a link to what you're looking at?
Sure, yeah. I said it doesn't exist yet, but it will be added soon. So we can just add to the chorus of people saying, please prioritize this.
Yeah, fantastic. This is my favorite kind of community work. +1. Oh, open API references. I lost the issue comment.
This issue comes from the fact that when you,
nice.
Paul, when you create a CRD, that you have a pod spec, and if you want to validate, it's pretty silly to revalidate your stuff. To copy, you have to copy the code because you cannot vendor, as you mentioned beforehand.
Yeah, I think the only workable solution there would be if there was like an API validations package, but I don't think that's going to happen. If dry run is going to be added, that's probably a way better solution.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, the other, you could, yeah, you could basically dry run every single time there's a change to a template and the overrides. You could dry run the heck out of that. Oh, look, you just changed something that could potentially break, and surface that super early rather than at the time of propagation where it's harder to give that feedback because it's asynchronous.
But there is something that I cannot understand with the approach of the dry run. The dry run server should stay in the federated cluster or should be in the federation?
A dry run server would be in the Federation API, and it would essentially be an option to like a create or update operation. And you'd say, given this representation, tell me if it's, run it through the validators and just give me a result, but don't affect object storage.
Okay. And shouldn't we have a dry run server per version?
I think that's less likely. Essentially, you'd be dry running against the base version. And when there is skew with newer versions that are members of the Federation, it would effectively be a break, like a bug in backwards compatibility. Mm. So when that was discovered, it would be like, oh, we need to go fix that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
See, how I see it is, if we are doing it with respect to, or if we have to do, the problem is only for, say, Federation, then just duplicating the same validation code inside Federation API server is fine. But keeping it outside is something like the same validation server or the same piece of code can actually be used by different consumers, for example, service catalog or CRDs or Federation. That's how I see advantage of keeping it separate, right?
I think like getting validation code involved it makes it more difficult to move to a world where there isn't code involved. If we can devise a strategy for using CRDs to define templates, for example, mm-hmm. then it should be possible to actually propagate a type that there's no code for, and all you have to do is create the right CRD and register it in the right way, and bang, you basically have de facto like the equivalent of an adapter in today's Federation v1 and Infinord. You basically just wouldn't need that anymore. And that's only possible if we don't require the validation code to be in the tree. As soon as we require validation code, then we have to actually change the controller to reflect that. So I'm not saying we couldn't do that as a short term. I'm just, if we could find another solution, I think it makes it easier to transition to a codeless propagation future.
Yep. Okay. We have 6 more minutes. Do we want?
Sorry, we lost you? Or is it just me?
Oh, sorry. I was automatically muted. We have 6 more minutes. Do we have something else specific to talk about? Oh, I remember one thing. I saw the code today afternoon. I was looking at the F0 code, and I saw that all the API types, the templates are named as, not just the templates, all the other types are also named as federated something, like federated replica set, federated secret, and all that. I thought we had a consensus that because the group is named Federation, so the overall group version resource would be unique, even if you define it as CRD or something. So we will be naming them as exact what they are, rather than prefixing everything as Federation. Something changed, or my understanding has flaw?
I've been waffling on name change because I agree with you that the federated prefix is kind of redundant. The one catch to like there needs to be name differentiation because we'll be aggregated to a Kubernetes API that exposes, say, replica set. So even though there's a group sort of namespace, we can't name the federation resource replica set. It would have to be like replica set template, which I am all for, with the caveat. Like, my thinking is if we were to fix on using these primitives long term, then template, placement, override, or substitution, or variation, or whatever term for that specific concept. But those three resources, if we're going to just have those be separate indefinitely, then calling it replica set template, replica set placement, replica set thing makes sense to me. The other side of the equation, though, is if at some point we're going to fold in, say, any one of those things, so there's no longer the distinct concept of template, variation and placement, then having like a federated replica set, you need some name. And I guess if template could be an acceptable name, that's fine, even if we fold it in other concepts. I just didn't want to preclude oh yeah, we're calling this the federated replica set, and at some point, it's going to change and it's going to become more than just the template. Then the name fits. I'm confusing things. Does that make sense?
I am actually confused a bit. Maybe I don't understand it very clearly. What's the problem naming it replica set itself?
Oh, right.
Does
so Paul,
the API server made it?
Yeah, Paul made the point that we're using kubectl. When you say, kubectl get replica set,
Okay.
then if there's multiple groups exposing the same name, even though that's technically possible at the API level, it makes things confusing at the CLI level.
So we ran into this when there's a resource in Service Catalog that's now called Service Binding. That was originally called Binding, and there's a core resource called Binding that also called Binding that's used by the scheduler to assign a pod to a node. It's basically like something that predates the existence of sub-resources. So it's like a little tiny like first-class resource. And when you have two resources with the same short name, you can't use either of them correctly via kube control.
I got it, and I got it. And using kube control, I think it will still work, but by default, probably in the group version listing, whatever replica set will be listed first, it'll taking an example of replica set, federation replica set, and an original core replica set. It probably might list the wrong one, which might give a wrong indication to the user.
You can still make it work correctly, but you have to add another coordinate to disambiguate which one you're talking about, and it's super awkward to do on a CLI.
Yeah, I understand. Okay. So yeah, I mean, I think Maru, then in that case, the template resource can still be named as federated resource, like federated replica set, but the others maybe can be the prefix can be dropped. What about that suggestion?
I guess I think for
some
reason
that's just a suggestion. I saw that, and
no. I mean, I think
it looked like everywhere federated string is what I was saying.
How about KFed replica set?
I don't mind KFed where it makes sense, but introductions everywhere rubs me a little bit the wrong way.
Yeah, that was a joke. We're at time now.
Let's continue this discussion. I'd like it another time. I don't think it really matters what we call it in the near term. I do think at some point we'll want to sort of make the UX a little bit simpler, and having federated everything everywhere makes it harder. My preference would be like federated prefix for everything or federated prefix for nothing, but that's just me. But let's talk offline.
Sure. So I will, just before closing, I'll update the invite. So next meeting, I would keep it as next Wednesday. Is that right, Paul? That's what we agreed on, right? Once a week on Wednesdays.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Thanks a lot, guys. See you next Wednesday then.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody. See ya.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.